taxes in Ontario are a possibility as the minority Liberal government in the province prepares a budget. Well, Progressive Conservative MPP Monty McNaughton is not optimistic.
We are in the greatest jobs and debt crisis in our lifetime, and it is concerning that Premier Wynn's first priority is to introduce bills on tanning beds, co-op housing, and the Great Lakes. To make matters worse, Ontarians learned today that Charles Sousa and the McGuinty-Wynne Liberals are considering raising their taxes. Does Premier Wynne honestly think that raising taxes on Ontarians is the best way to address a fiscal crisis? It's clear the only way to get Ontario back on the right track, is to change the team that leads it.
Meantime, Premier Kathleen Wynne's mind was on the horse race in Ontario today, not polling numbers, the actual horse racing industry announcing a new deal to keep it going. Here's what she had to say.
I've got some good news that I want to share with you today. I want to let you know that 3-year transition funding agreements have been signed with 4 more tracks. So Western Fair, Clinton, Hanover, and right here, Grand River. So those are agreements that are on top of agreements with Woodbine and Mohawk. And we're expecting that more will come in the weeks to come. The negotiations are still ongoing, and I'm looking forward to more agreements.
Well, for more on this and all of Battleground Ontario, let's bring in Sun columnist Christina Blizzard in Toronto. Good to have you on the show, and want to ask you first of all about the taxes issue. Provincial Finance Minister asked whether he would hold the line on taxes. He said he couldn't promise that he would hold the line on taxes, which might strike some fear into the hearts of Ontarians who are looking at their pocketbooks.
Well, of course, Daniel, and this is the government, don't forget, that brought in the HST, which basically, raised taxes on just about everything by 7%, and they got away with it. They got reelected. So I don't know if they consider themselves still Teflon on all these tax hikes. They have brought in some of the biggest tax hikes in this province's history. They brought in the healthcare tax, or the healthcare levy, they called it. So I think everything's on the table.
And the healthcare levy actually came specifically after then Premier McGuinty had promised that he would not raise taxes.
Absolutely. That was their very first budget. They brought that in after McGuinty had looked into the cameras in that now infamous campaign ad and said, "I won't raise your taxes 1 cent." Obviously, the provincial Liberals are staring down a $12 billion deficit, and they have doubled the debt since they came to power 9 years ago. So, I asked Charles Sousa, the finance minister, again today, and he sort of sidestepped the question. I asked him if he was going to raise taxes. He wouldn't say yes or no.
Well, and the trouble as we look at this from the taxpayer's perspective is that the pressure on the Liberals to come up with a budget that can pass muster in the legislature, because they have a minority, the pressure to do that really comes from the NDP. The Progressive Conservatives have given really no indication that they're interested in seeing this government last any longer. It's the NDP that is still the question mark, and if you're going to please the NDP, being a deficit hawk isn't the way to do it.
Well, absolutely. The NDP just wants them to spend more. They want, they will be once again holding the Liberals, they'll have another little exercise in blackmail. Well, we want this and we want that. And they're all big ticket items in order for this budget to pass.
I want to ask you a little bit about the horse racing industry in Ontario. How significant is what we heard from Premier Wynne today?
Well, I think if you listen carefully, what's happening is that they are giving the OLG, the Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corporation, more powers over horse racing. It's very significant, obviously, for rural Ontario, which is where they are hurting. The Liberals are hurting most because what they did when they ended this revenue sharing scheme, which the Liberals insist on calling a subsidy, which it is not. It was something that was brought in 2000 by the PC PCs under Mike Harris, it was a way of finding somewhere that was above board and reasonable, a place where they could put the slot machines that historically had gambling on site that could handle this kind of wagering. So the government suddenly decided they wanted all of that pie instead of sharing the revenues. So, and they got a lot of kickback from rural Ontario, where so many people have sort of 1 or 2 horses or a few horses, and it just became, it was going to destroy that industry.
All right, so maybe plugging a couple of holes just before a possible election, I suppose.
I think so, Daniel.
All right, thank you again.
My pleasure.